Hello and welcome to MetalshubTalks with me, Samir Jaber. In today's episode, we explore the chromium industry and how global supply chains are being shaped by geopolitics, sustainability requirements, industrial transformation, and digitalization. As you already know, chromium is a critical raw material for stainless steel production and many industrial applications. It is one of those materials that sits deep inside global manufacturing supply chains, but its importance becomes even clearer when you look at the role it plays in stainless steel and corrosion resistance and industrial performance. And today, the chromium market is facing a much more complex operating environment. Geopolitical tensions are affecting trade flows, energy pressures are influencing production economics, and sustainability expectations are becoming more important for producers and buyers. Not to mention, regulatory mechanisms such as CBAM are starting to reshape how companies think about sourcing, emissions, and supply chain transparency. At the same time, regional dynamics are changing. We see South Africa continues to face smelting and energy related constraints. China's domestic strategy is evolving. Indonesia is expanding its industrial footprint. And across the value chain, companies are under pressure to build supply chains that are more resilient, more competitive, and better prepared for regulatory and commercial scrutiny. So, what does all that mean for producers, traders, and steel manufacturers? And how is the chromium supply chain changing today? And how can digital tools and AI and more structured workflows help modernize how chromium is produced, traded, and managed? To answer these questions, I'd like to welcome my amazing guests here today. I'm pleased to welcome Sheraz Neffati, Executive Director of the International Chromium Development Association, or the ICDA. Shiraz, it's a pleasure to have you with us. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you for the nice introduction, Samir.
Fantastic. You're welcome. And I'm also joined by our very own Dr. Sebastian Kreft, co-founder and managing director at Metalshub. Sebastian, great to have you here again on Metalshub Talks. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful and looking forward to this webinar about one of my favorite metals, chromium.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. But before we jump into the discussion, to everybody watching us live, let me quickly show you how you can interact with us here today. So in the bottom right corner of your screen, you got the chat function and the questions function. So as you would know, the chat function, you can just interact with us. You can go right now and introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from, what you're expecting from today's discussion. And if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share throughout the discussion, we're happy to hear you out as we go through it. And if you have any questions to our guests today, you can always add these into the question section where we have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We could really get to answer as many questions as we could during that time. Sounds good? All right, so let's start right in. And Shiraz, I'd like to start with you. So the ICDA represents companies across the chrome supply chain. As the executive director, could you tell us what the mission of the ICDA is?
Yes, definitely. And welcome to all the guests online. And thanks also to you and Metalshub for the invitation. We are very pleased to speak also to your stakeholders and your network. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the ICDA, but some of you may not be. So as Samir said, ICDA stands for International Chromium Development Association. And it is a more than 40-year-old not-for-profit association that was established in 1984 through industry initiative. So it is not a private initiative. And the founders of the ICDA were global chrome ore and ferrochrome producers, some of whom are still very active in the industry and also within the association today. So we are very proud of that. It includes Tata Steel Limited and Samanca Chrome. Also, Outokumpu joined 1 year after the ICD was established. And others, unfortunately, founders have been acquired or have left the industry. It included chrome ore and ferrochromium producers in Sweden, Spain, Greece, and the Philippines. That sounds now today a bit I would say, unusual because they are no longer ferrochromium producers in Spain or Greece. A key objective of the ICDA is to promote the responsible use of chromium across the value chain. And we are proud to say that our membership today spans more than 110 companies, covering mining, ferrochrome production, stainless steel manufacturing, trading, and other service providers, including shipping and logistics. And what we do, we provide industry with regular reports, scientific study, with a strong focus on ESG topics. We also work closely with downstream market association to make sure we are safeguarding existing markets, and we are also supporting the development of new markets. And we are an international established network, as many of you know, and we do regularly organize this conference and networking events. And we're also very pleased to have Metalshub supporting us and also joining the discussion stage during those conferences.
That is fantastic, and we were pleased as well from Metalshub. Now, Sheraz, as we mentioned earlier, chromium is essential to global stainless steel and high-performance alloy production, yet it often receives far less attention than other raw materials. From the ICDA's perspective, how do you see chromium's strategic importance today?
That's a very good question, and I have a very long answer, but I know we have 45 minutes. Of course, Sebastian needs to also share some of his views. But yeah, I think, as you mentioned, chromium is essential, and I would even argue that chromium is critical to global stainless and also high-performance alloy production, because it is the key element, and today the only one without a true substitute for stainless steel and high-performance alloy production that provides this with their high resistance to corrosion, alongside other mechanical strength, durability, and resistance to both extreme high and low temperature. So, and I'm just mixing my notes. Yeah. As I would like to say, these are used across a wide range of very strategic application, and from smallest precision components to large structural parts, and all of which are essential in strategic sectors such as defense, aerospace, energy, engineering, industrial manufacturing, infrastructure, water distribution, medical technology, agriculture, food processing, and so on. So collectively, these uses make chromium highly relevant to national security, economic development, and industrial stability. And you won't be surprised to hear that NATO has classified chromium as highly critical for a wide range of military application, and also many jurisdictions, including United States, Canada, China, Japan, Russia, and India have also designated chromium as a critical or strategic raw material. So depending on the country, this classification can translate into export restrictions, supply security policies, value addition strategies, and also measures to limit external dependence. Notably, the EU, surprisingly, also has not yet classified chromium as critical or strategic, despite having done so in the past, for the reasons which has been outlined earlier. And so I would personally consider chromium to be both critical and strategic, including on an EU perspective. Another point is a paradox for chrome. I will call it the chromium paradox, because chromium is relatively abundant. Global resources are estimated over 12 billion tons of shipping grades chromite. However, these resources are highly concentrated, 72% in South Africa, 12% in Zimbabwe, 7% in Kazakhstan, based on the current exploration data. We have Finland, of course, and for Europe, accounting for roughly 5%. And other jurisdictions, such as India and Turkey, hold smaller shares. So overall, we can say that 84% of global chromite resources are concentrated in Southern Africa. While South Africa and Zimbabwe are relatively stable today from a political perspective, South Africa has been facing significant systemic challenges over the past decades, which have affected its competitiveness as a ferroalloy producer, as you all know, as you mentioned also in your introduction. So South Africa's ferrochrome industry, and we have seen, has gone through significant consolidation over the past decades. There were almost 12 ferrochrome producers, only 2 are left today. And that was mainly due to sharply rising electricity costs. Eskom tariffs have been increasing around tenfold, power shortages, socioeconomic instability, and other systemic issues, which left space for capacity expansion in other jurisdictions, such as China. So the installed South African capacity has fallen from around 6.5 to 7 million ton in the mid-2010s to about 4.7 million ton in 2024-2025, with production largely concentrated in 2 integrated players, whom we know, Glencore Merafe and Samancor Chrome. And during that time, China has been expanding its capacity from 13.8 million ton in 2019 to 18.3 million ton in 2025, supported by government policies, low-cost power, and particularly in Inner Mongolia. Inner Mongolia is accounting today for 75% of China ferrochrome output. Today, 90% of South Africa chrome ore is being imported by China, and the country is having few to no resources in its ground, which is why chrome is critical to China. And this increases also pressure on other jurisdictions to diversify their supply, and also significantly reduces the volume available to other importers, including Europe. And at the same time, supply is highly concentrated. So for years, Europe has relied primarily on imports from a limited number of suppliers, and particularly South Africa as well as Turkey. So I know it's quite a long answer. And coming back to Europe, because I'm sure that many of our participants are also based in Europe, and Europe is the only jurisdiction for now, major one, which have not been classifying chromium as critical. We find that Europe is structurally import dependent. From official custom trade figures, we found that chrome ore imports also they account for the majority of Europe's supply, and same for ferrochrome, around 70%. And the supply to Europe is also concentrated among a small number of producers, South Africa, which account for over half of Europe imports for ferrochrome, followed by Kazakhstan, Zimbabwe, and a few other suppliers. So this combination of concentrated external supply increases Europe exposure to supply risk, although there are 2 high carbon ferrochrome producers in Europe. We know them, Corex, Varganalois, and Outokumpu, and 1 low carbon ferrochrome producer, Electro-Weisweiler. So supply is also vulnerable to disruption linked to energy constraint, logistics bottlenecks, potential policy measures in producing countries, and also recent geopolitical developments, including sanctions we've seen that have shown how quickly also supply options can be reduced, that is Russian gas. So to conclude and to answer your question, following this digression, determining whether chromium should be classified as a critical material requires a structural assessment of several factors, including geographic concentration of resources, economic and political stability of producing jurisdiction, the level of supply chain concentration, a clear analysis of geopolitical vulnerabilities, and taken together, these elements will define not only supply risk, but also the strategic exposure of depending jurisdiction. That's it for my answer.
That's a fantastic answer. There's a lot to unlock there, and I love that you came strong with the data, because it's really, really helpful to bring the discussion to a different level. But before we dive into the details there, Sebastian, I'd like your comments on what Sheraz has said so far. From Metalshub's perspective, how do we see chromium, given what Sheraz explained so far?
Yeah, I think I can only agree with what Sheraz has been saying. There are a few reasons why there might be a little bit less attention on chromium than other metals. First of all, there are some markets which are just larger, like copper or aluminium, compared to the chrome market. That's factor number 1. Then there is this concentration where actually chrome ore is in the earth. So there's a lot in Southern Africa. So the Australian and Canadian local press will not report about chromium so much, because it is very much concentrated in very few countries. And then compared to other metals, there's really one key usage, which is stainless steel. And if you look at some other metals, maybe it might be more broad, but for chromium, it's largely stainless steels. And everyone who is in the stainless steel industry, one way or another, will tell you that chrome is very, very important. So I think it's just a little bit the perspective and some things around the chromium industry that make it very special.
Fully agree. Yeah, and I mean this is great, and I'd really like to unlock what you talked about, Sheraz, and maybe starting when we talk about market dynamics, starting with South Africa as a first point. As you mentioned, historically, South Africa has been the largest producer of ferrochrome, but structural challenges, right, such as high energy costs and others, have put this position at risk. So we've seen, or at least you've mentioned to us how it's been so far. How do you view South Africa's evolving role in the broader chromium ecosystem?
Thank you. So I think that given the geology, first of all, South Africa will remain a major player in the chromium industry, simply because the market cannot decouple from a country that holds about 72% of global chrome ore resources. And so South Africa chrome ore is critical to the global ferrochromium production and the global stainless steel production. From a ferroalloys perspective, and beyond the restart of the smelters in South Africa, it is also important to consider how market fundamentals have evolved over time. And that may lead then naturally to your next question, but I will not expand. But there is a strong correlation between these developments. The market is no longer the same as it was 5 years ago, and it has shifted. While South Africa was dealing with its systemic challenges, both China and Indonesia, they have been expanding their production capacity. So as a result, although China and also South Africa remain central to the supply chain, the competitive environment has changed. China and Indonesia have built, and they are continuing to build, greater ferrochrome self-sufficiency.
Right. So I mean, let's talk about China and Indonesia then, because I mean we've seen that they've been importing increasing volumes of chrome ore, and are becoming self-sufficient to serve the domestic industry, the stainless steel industry, with locally produced ferrochrome. So how are these developments reshaping supply chains, reshaping competitiveness, and long-term industrial policy as well?
First of all, it's important to know, and I think that many of you know, that China does not export ferrochrome. It exports stainless steel and other finished goods. There is a 40% duty applied in China on exports anyway for ferrochrome to encourage local value addition. So China is consuming the majority of available chromium units within its own value chain. And this shift has been significant over the past decade. China and Indonesia now, they account for around 64% of the global ferrochromium production, which is not exported, but consumed to produce stainless steel. While Africa's share has declined sharply. And for Europe, this also means reduced access to a key source of supply and also growing exposure to external market dynamics. As for South Africa, it historically accounted for over half of China's high carbon ferrochrome imports, and its share declined to 39%. And you know it because both countries, China and Indonesia, are building self-sufficiency. And so shipment from South Africa to China fell by 47% year on year in 2025. So market fundamentals are changing, and therefore anticipation and adaptability are key also to supply chain competitiveness. I hope it answers your question.
That's really interesting. I mean, looking at all of these different countries, I mean, another player in this space, or a growing player in this space, is Zimbabwe as well. And we know that Zimbabwe has ambitious plans to create jobs locally and move from being this ore exporter to more of a ferrochrome producing country. So from what you've seen so far, how is this plan progressing, and what are the challenges that you've seen?
First of all, I would like to say that Zimbabwe is a ferrochrome producing country, as well as a key supplier of chrome ore, and a supplier mostly to China. And we've seen that in the first quarter of 2026, close to 100% of the Zimbabwe chrome ore exports have been shipped to China. Today, I don't know whether you know, but there are 19 ferrochrome producers in Zimbabwe, as well as a number of upcoming projects, which are majority owned by Chinese entities, which is also a reflection of the strong diplomatic ties between both China and Zimbabwe, which I think is an important point to consider on a geopolitical analysis perspective. Nevertheless, and I would like to quote also the Honorable Minister of Mines and Mining Development, Palai Kambamura, whom we met together also with Sebastian at the ICDA Africa Chromium Week in April this year in Zimbabwe, who reported that Zimbabwe is also open to foreign investment and not only from China. So to date, there are 43 furnaces in Zimbabwe, and the annual capacity is 789,780 million tons. Furthermore, yeah, it's precise, ambitious projects are planned. And the most significant project for our sector is a $3.6 billion project that is being developed by a major Chinese ferrochrome producers located in Inner Mongolia. And this project is called Palm River and is located in Beitbridge area in Zimbabwe. And the aim of this project is to produce 1 million tons of steel per year, including both carbon and stainless steel. So Zimbabwe really has the ambition to become a stainless steel producer. And it will also include a coking and ferrochrome processing plant, supported by a 50 megawatt thermal power station. And in the final phase of the project, phase 5, I don't have the exact timeline, but the aim is to produce 1 million ton stainless steel and to have a final ferrochrome capacity of up to 2 million ton in Zimbabwe, only for this installation, for this site. So it's worth noting that China is the most significant investor in Zimbabwe mining sector. And also Chinese companies are reported to actively build local processing activities and beneficiation, and therefore align with the government vision and goals. So Zimbabwe goal is to build a vertically integrated industry with strong emphasis on value addition to produce high value steel and stainless steel product for both local and export markets, therefore also impacting the availability of chromium units as well, because when they will be consumed internally will no longer be available for exports. So it seems that Zimbabwe plan is no longer to be just a resource base.
All right, then Sebastian, I'd love to bring you in here.
Yeah, maybe just directly to this. I mean, it was really amazing to be in Zimbabwe and listen to the Minister of Mines, to the Vice President, about what their vision is of the country to build a ferrochrome and stainless steel industry, and they're very committed to do so. And it's different than when you read it in the press or you actually hear it from the people that are involved. So for me, it was clear there's a clear ambition and there's a clear vision where they want to take the country. Of course, there are challenges, and one challenge always is power. Because when you produce ferrochrome, you need a lot of power, and it's about 50% of the production cost of ferrochrome is due to the electricity. But I think what Zimbabwe is doing quite smartly is that they allow the ferrochrome producer to set up their own electricity generation, their own power generation. In South Africa, that's not possible because Eskom has a monopoly. In Zimbabwe, the government allows, and actually they need additional power generation if they want to fulfill their ambition. The second challenge which Zimbabwe faces is that it's a landlocked country. In that regard, South Africa has an advantage because from Zimbabwe, you need to get to the port, you need to cross through Mozambique, you need to get to Maputo. Yeah. So that will be the next challenge. There needs to be the infrastructure, rail infrastructure, road infrastructure to actually get the ferrochrome and the stainless steel to the port. But we also discussed that at the ICDA, there are a lot of capable people in the country that understand that challenge and that are working on solving it.
That's a really great insight. I mean, it's really interesting so far. There's a lot to learn from this. We've talked about your view of the chromium market so far. We've talked about why chromium is critical as a material itself, the different market dynamics from these all different countries in Africa and Asia, and how that also applies to Europe. I'd like to talk about trade policy, if it's okay with you, and explore just maybe a bit of a different angle, because we know that the EU CBAM is now fully operational. So what does that mean for chromium producers outside of the EU? So there's we know that Chrome has successfully received an EPD. So how does that matter, Sheraz?
That's a question for me. Yes, and it's nice to see that Chrome received an EPD. I think they were the third one. First one was Outokumpu, second was Tata Steel, and third was Chrome. And I think that this is becoming increasingly important across the value chain and for customers. And this is also what we are seeing now with our life cycle assessment that we are updating. There are more and more companies now willing to participate into the study, which is great for us, because then it means that we are able to provide the industry with an average that is very close to the reality. And the advantage for the companies is that they are getting their own confidential individual report, which they can also use with their customers. So it means that companies need data, and they are now more and more cognizant of that, and that they're really paying attention to that. So, which I think is a good point for industry as well. Related to CBAM, just want to clarify, because you mentioned chromium producers, that it doesn't cover the ore for now. I've heard that it may cover ores in the next phase, but for now it's not yet on the agenda. So I think then in this context, I will only speak about ferrochromium producers and not even stainless steel. So CBAM is part of a broader policy framework aimed at safeguarding EU ferroalloy producers, and many of which have made significant investment in the green transition. They are our members, and we see the efforts from this company in becoming greener. So the objective is really to create a level playing field between EU producers and imports from regions with less stringent environmental requirements. Some stakeholders, of course, would argue that CBAM could affect the EU stainless steel industry by increasing the cost of imported raw materials, and I can't expand further on this aspect, of course, due to compliance considerations. I would say that CBAM may also appear incomplete for now in its current form, because it doesn't cover the finished goods, and that leaves also open the possibility of importing products with a higher carbon footprint than equivalent goods manufactured within the EU. And also something to consider also is the pace at which China is advancing its energy transition. In Mongolia is the country's main ferroalloy production hubs, as we said, 75% of ferrochrome production share. And it is now also the leading renewable energy region. And I can tell you, because I was there in 2018, and I was there in 2025, and I did not even recognize the area. And also the sky was blue, and the air was clean, and so far it was okay to breathe, and which was not the case in 2018, I must say. So the efforts have been tremendous. And renewable energy already represents in Inner Mongolia more than half of the region installed power generation, and that accounts for roughly 1/3 of the actual electricity generation in Inner Mongolia. And by 2030, Inner Mongolia is aiming for the clean energy to represent around 65% of its installed capacity, and therefore contributing more than 40% of the total electricity consumption. So to achieve this, there's been strong investment in large-scale wind, solar projects, as well as green hydrogen and in energy storage initiative. And also, we've seen that according to the International Energy Agency, which is therefore a very tangible source, China is targeting peak carbon emission before 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060. So in their long-term vision, coal and gas are expected to play only a limited role, primarily supported grid stability. And what I want to mean by this is that China could be able in the very near future to supply goods with a very low CO2 footprint. And they're also closely observing current geopolitical and economic development and appear focused on strengthening energy security, reducing dependencies, and also maintaining export competitiveness through the production of lower carbon goods. So, which is why, on a policy perspective, this is my personal view on CBAM. I think CBAM is primarily a reactive measure. Of course, it is good, designed to address today's challenge, but it's not an anticipatory framework, which may aim at future competitive dynamics.
All right. Sebastian, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you look at product carbon footprint of ferrochrome, it's obviously driven by energy. How do you produce the energy? Is it hydro or is it carbon? And you can see
80%.
In Europe, in Northern Europe, you have access to hydropower, so you can produce ferrochrome with a much lower carbon footprint than in regions where you use coal-fired power. So actually the gap is very big, and also for a stainless steel producer that wants to lower its own carbon footprint of the stainless steel, choosing to buy ferrochrome with a lower carbon footprint has a big impact on the final product, because obviously there's 18%, sometimes more, sometimes less chromium in stainless steel. So there are these very big differences in different suppliers of ferrochrome when it comes to the carbon footprint. With CBAM, for the very first time, there is now also an economic incentive for ferrochrome producers outside of the EU to invest in decarbonization, because there are real costs when this material gets imported into the European market, something that wasn't the case before. So, of course, it's not perfect. Of course, people are complaining that the list of auditors is not finished yet that can do these audits, and this might come, but I do think it's a step into the right direction, and yeah, it will take some time.
Yes, indeed. Really interesting insights there. And I'm actually seeing some activity in the chat as well, which is great on the topic as we discuss it. But Sheraz, sticking with policy and trade policy in general, is there an impact from this recently implemented 20th EU sanction package on the chromium industry?
We've been looking at it, and we found that it primarily strengthened and reinforces the existing measures, so it doesn't change that much. And so we can't really identify any new direct impact on the chromium industry at this stage, but we found that the new package is really expected to make the circumvention of sanctions more challenging. So both for the supply of chrome to Russia and also for the purchases of chrome, which are of Russia as an origin. And it's important also to know that the chrome is very critical to Russia. It's very strategic also, given chromium in all the related application.
Okay, good to know. But I mean, see, we can't talk about geopolitics today without mentioning the war taking place in the Middle East, especially with the closing and opening and the closing again of the Strait of Hormuz. So what is the impact of this war on the chromium supply chain today?
I think it's very early to draw some conclusion, but at the start of the conflict, of course, we've seen price increases, which were mostly related to diesel supply, shipping, insurance costs, and also uncertainty created by the situation is also negatively impacting the demand and consequently the global trade. So, as said, it may be too early to draw some conclusion regarding the broader impacts on chromium markets, but on the higher level and the global picture, as many experts also have noted, the longer the conflict is going to persist and the more severe and prolonged its economic consequences are likely to be. And I think we can all experience these in our countries, the respective countries. Higher oil prices always translate into higher energy costs, which in turn is fueling inflation, reducing industry competitiveness, weaken demand, and ultimately to, again, lower consumption. So Stability, we all know, is a key driver for economic growth, and this is also one of the reasons why several countries and regions are also seeking to reshore their industrial activity. It's a trend now we are seeing also in Europe, in the US, of course, and Zimbabwe, to strengthen domestic markets and reduce their dependence also on external supply chains.
All right, and I'm being mindful of the time because I mean I know we have limited time, and this discussion is really interesting. But first of all, thank you for people who started putting their questions in. We'll try to get as many questions as we can in the short time that we have. But before we do, Sebastian, we talked so far about the material itself, about the market dynamics, about geopolitics and policies. I want to talk about digitalization and future readiness. So MetalsHub constantly discusses digitalization and AI as key technologies for companies in the metals and mining industry today and tomorrow. Where do you see opportunities for AI and digital tools to improve chromium supply chain management over the next years, maybe even over the next decade?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to understand we are still very early days when it came to AI, right? If you would ask ChatGPT 1 year ago, who's leading the Bundesliga table, ChatGPT would not be able to answer that question. And now we are much further already. And adoption of new technology takes time. So when smartphones first came out, until they were really adopted, it took 6, 7, 8 years. We're seeing that these adoption cycles are getting much, much faster. But I think if I look at today, the chromium industry, people are using AI tools in their private life, but not so much yet in their professional lives, in their business lives, in the systems that they're using today. I think that is going to change. I mean, we at MetalShub try to find the best use cases where AI makes sense. And there are two things which we're really focusing on. One is to take unstructured data, which comes from email, Excel sheets, other file formats, and put it automatically with AI into structured data. That is something that you cannot do deterministically by writing software code. That is something that AI is really good at, structuring this data and avoiding manual entries and avoiding all these things. The second use case, which is very interesting, is connecting different data sources. Say you have your contracts in MetalShub, you have your certificates analysis sitting in a shared drive, you have some information about your transportation cost budget in an Excel sheet. Connecting all these data sources to your LLM of choice. So you might be using Claude, there might be then an MCP connector where you have a connection to all these data sources, and suddenly you can work with data that sit in different locations and you can ask questions, you can find out, you can connect things. Tell me for my last shipment, when did it arrive, what were the anticipated shipping costs, what were the real shipping costs. You can set up alerts, you can say, when there's a difference between the contract and the COA, please make sure that I get an email that alerts me that I pay attention to this topic because that fire might be coming up soon. So it enables things which you couldn't do before in a very new way. And that way it can actually transform the way companies work.
That's really interesting. And I think what MetalsHub is doing and what the way the industry is developing and following the digitalization trends, AI can play a really, really significant role, as you said, Sebastian. Sheraz, any comments from you on how you see digitalization so far?
Well, in our industry, I've seen that digitalization have been mostly used in the field of ESG within our membership. It can be through systems that will enable companies to gather data, or a system that will also enable company for better governance. So I think that AI is a very good tool to help you deal with quite extensive level of data. Mostly, and this is what our industry is doing at the moment. Also, we see that there also some use of AI in mines and there's a lot of automation ongoing. So, and with the use of AI tools. So, as Sebastian mentioned, with regard to the use of AI, it takes time. It's still the beginning. So, I think maybe in the next 10 years to 20 years, AI will really be a normal part of our lives and of the business, but now at the moment it's still in the experimentation phase.
Agreed. And I mean, I have a lot more questions for you, believe me, but I know that the time is quite limited, and I'd like to give some time for the audience to ask their questions as well. So if it's okay with both of you, I'd like to move to Q&A before we end the session. But thank you so far for this insightful discussion so far. Now, I have a question here very quickly, and I'm going to try to squeeze as many questions as I can. And maybe a question to both of you. For steel producers buying ferrochrome, what is the biggest supply chain risk to monitor this year? So
that's a good question.
You go first.
Yeah. I think it was more or less pretty well covered during by the answers I gave. I would say overall the geopolitical vulnerabilities. This is very important to watch, and also supply concentration as well. This would be key to watch. Yeah.
I would say that the biggest risk is off the table, because in South Africa, the two big producers have said, if you don't give us lower power costs, we're going to stop producing ferrochrome. And that would have been a huge risk for the Western stainless steel industry if they had stopped producing ferrochrome. Now there's some certainty. So Glencore got a deal for reduced electricity tariffs for the next 3 years. Sameco got a deal for the next 5 years. So I would say the biggest risk that was out there still 1 or 2 months ago is, fortunately for stainless steel companies, now off the table, because there's some certainty that these companies will continue to produce ferrochrome.
Yeah, that was a risk, but then we also need to see how the broader context is going to evolve within the coming 3 years, and whether then this negotiated tariff it would still be relevant by that time.
Yeah, and that's probably the one thing, or the most important thing to watch, which is the electricity cost situation in different countries.
Yeah.
all right. Well, another question talks about Zimbabwe. I think it was asked when you were talking about Zimbabwe, Sheraz, and it's saying that Zimbabwe has seen smelters mushrooming across the country, and so you've got big ferrochrome producing organizations across there. So are we going to see an oversupply of ferrochrome?
That's a very good question. I think it's very difficult to answer the question now. From the latest trade figures that we've seen as of the first quarter of 2026, most of the ferrochrome that was produced by Zimbabwe was being exported to China, and also significant share exported to Europe as well. So I think that the aim now of of Zimbabwe is really to develop its stainless steel industry. Of course, it's really only in the initial phase. Nothing has been really yet started, but it's also important to know that most of the ferrochrome entities in Zimbabwe are Chinese owned, and therefore the ferrochrome is mostly being shipped to China. So that's for the Chinese stainless steel industry.
All right. Thank you for that. I mean, we still have just 2 minutes. So any questions that we haven't answered, we'll try to get to them later on. We'll reach out to you via email. But I'd like to give you some closing remarks before we finish. So Sheraz, can you maybe tell us a little bit also about Chromium 2026 and the conference that you're having?
Of course. And I do hope that I managed to answer some of the questions. And I'm also happy to take any questions by email, also questions that need some more research and data. I'm also happy to take a look at all these questions. And otherwise, if you want to continue the conversation, I would like to invite all of you to join the Chromium 2026 conference in Paris. It is an open conference, and we are going to discuss everything from geopolitics to raw materials to stainless steel through several panel discussions. And of course, we are very happy to have a Metalshub as a partner for this conference, and a speaker as well, part of one of the panels. So you're more than welcome to join us and continue the discussion, and also to further explore what the ICDA will also bring to your company if you are not yet familiar with the ICDA.
Yeah, maybe just from my personal experience, having been in Sevilla last year, there's two good reasons to go. One, the agenda is always superb, where there's really, really good speakers talking about the latest, most current topics of the industry. And the second is the level of participants is also really, really good. So there are really senior people attending, specialists, experts from different areas of the chromium industry. So also from a networking perspective, it is, I would say, the best event out there in the chrome industry.
Thank you.
That is fantastic. And I mean, thank you both, Sheraz and Sebastian, for sharing such valuable insights into the chromium industry and the forces shaping its future. I mean, from regional production shifts to regulatory developments, to sustainability, supply chain resilience, digitalization, this is clearly a market undergoing significant transformation. So it's been a pleasure talking about this with you both. And you're always welcome to join me again in a future episode.
Yeah.
We could maybe revisit these topics again. So thank you.
Looking forward to an update. Thanks.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you, everyone, for joining us live or later if you're watching us on our website or on YouTube. As always, it's a pleasure to have you here with us at MetalshubTalks. Keep an eye out for our next episodes, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.